Hi, Terry. This is Dr. Alex Stewart, and this is a report for you analyzing your active listing at 177 River Marsh Drive. The purpose of this is to see what's going on with this property, the market, the competition, and the timing in terms of seasonal factors to give you a better understanding of how this house is positioned on the market and to give you an outside independent analysis of what I think might be best to actually get this property sold. Of course, the biggest thing that might alter any of this and what the seller might want to do is the seller's motivation. And if the seller's not really motivated to sell the house or isn't in a hurry and is fine just leaving it on the market and seeing if the right buyer comes along and happens to purchase the home, then great. But if the seller is serious about selling this house, then this report will provide direct recommendations on that. Okay. So the first thing I want to start off with is the executive summary and give you my overview of the analysis and what I would recommend. First and foremost, I would say that this property has tested the market multiple times, being listed and expiring a couple times before its current stint on the market. And what I would say is that the market is rejecting the price of this home because the pricing has been relatively similar each time the home has gone on the market and the home has not been able to sell. So this is clear evidence to me that this home is priced above the market currently. Also, there has been an influx in listings in this market. Now, we've talked about this in our coaching sessions as we've looked at this. It's not so much that there's more sellers than normal. It's that there's fewer buyers than normal. And that's causing listings to build up throughout the Northeast Florida area, which is resulting in more competition for every listing out there. This means that sellers are not able to simply just test the market and get whatever they want like they could in 2021. They have to come to the market at a price that is at the market and ready to sell. And again, this goes back to the first point. We're seeing clear evidence that this home is not at that price point currently. When we look at what is selling in and around this home, we can see that the properties that are closing and going under contract are doing so relatively quickly. They're selling oftentimes less than a month. All of the homes are less than 60 days. And so you know that if you're on the market more than 60 days, you've really been over the market, and we know that the price is wrong. Now, again, every once in a while, there's a unicorn buyer that enters the market that wasn't there before and might decide to purchase the home because it is existing and is what is available. But right now, we see that there are clear evidence that there's buyers out there, and they're choosing to buy homes relatively quickly as they come onto the market because they are priced appropriately or there is something else with the home, which is the next point. Because when we look at the price per square foot, it's not the cheapest homes that are selling. It is typically homes that would be deemed as maybe more rare. Maybe they're in a good location, a unique location. Maybe they have a certain level of quality. Maybe they're laid out in a certain way, because the price per square foot would not say that it is only bargain shoppers out there. It would just say that there are unique homes that are hitting the market and they're coming off the market fairly quickly. And then finally, my recommendation based on the numbers, right? This is not me touring the house. This is not me going and driving the neighborhoods. This is me looking at it from a distance, but arguably a more objective, independent sort of take is to reduce the price to $1.399. You'll see why as we walk through this, but I think that when you look at the history of the home, we have tested in the 1.4s and it doesn't sell. All right. Now, of course, that's after price reductions. And that's the hard part. If the home had started at 1.4 from the very beginning, it might get more traction. But because the home is starting in the 1.5s and being reduced after a significant amount of time on market, I don't think the 1.4s is enough to get this done. I think you need to be in the 1.3s to get that traction. Additionally, we see significant step up in showings at that price point. So there appears to be more buyers in that 1.3 range. And so I think you got to get into the 1.3 to get this moving. Now, if we dive into the analysis, let's start by just going through the listing history. I think this is helpful because A, it shows you the information I'm going off of, so you can correct me if you see anything that's wrong. And B, it really tells the story of this home, right? So first and foremost, I'm going to talk about Area 263, and I want to define that, right? Your subject property, this home is located in MLS 263, which you can see is this area right here. Covers essentially the plantation at Ponte Vedra, which is this whole area right here, and down here towards Guana, where there's not much development. Okay, now it is essentially west of A1A, and that's a critical, important point because obviously prices change significantly if you go over that road. Okay, and as we look at the history of this, again, the most recent sale for this home was 626, but this was way back in 2011. If we look, again, two tries on the market that didn't work out, and then we're currently on our third stint, and we can see just sort of how this went, right? Started listing in September at 1.6, dropped slightly into 1.57, and then ultimately taken off the market before the holidays. And I think that this is critical for us to recognize, and we'll talk about this in the seasonal factors, but coming on the market in September is tough because you've already missed sort of the ramp up of spring buyers that want to purchase something maybe while school's out. So that's a critical factor to know. Now, the retirees and things like that, you know, they're a little more all over the year, but I still think 1.6, this is a move up house for a lot of families where maybe they've owned a house for a while and are looking to step up in their home. This isn't ultra luxury because it's not over $2-3 million. This is something that I do think families would potentially look at based on the price point. So we want to factor that in. All right, if we look at the next time this came on the market, it came on in February. And the hard part with February is it is a little bit early. Typically, the lowest prices of the year are in January and February, and that's just because it's still cold outside. We don't have a lot of daylight. It's a little too soon for all those families to start looking at homes to close on them during the summer. And I think the hard part here is that, you know, we went 77 days before we did a price reduction, and the price reduction wasn't that significant. 157 versus 152, not that different of a price point. I think that 149 would have made a lot more sense on this first price reduction to get it into a different tier of prices. Okay, and these smaller price cuts with longer time frames cause this to not be as attractive, right? It's not significant enough to really move the needle. I also see that I have a mistake right here of this being 77 days on market. I believe this should be more like 97 days on market. So I'll get that updated in the slides that I send you. And then here we are currently, right? 156, no price reduction currently. A new roof has been added, but I want to call out that a lot of sellers would say, hey, I put a new roof on, therefore we need to add that to the price because that's more value. Any appraiser would tell you that that is not a value improving adjustment to a home or improvement to a home because everybody expects to have a working roof when they buy a home. And typically what you do is you find that there is a discount for an old roof, not a premium for a new roof, if that makes sense. So the new roof is considered deferred maintenance. Should have been something that was done in general. People expect the roof to be good going in. And so the price was dropped a little bit, but as we look at the market stats, I think the price has, you know, fallen by more than this just over this time frame. So one other factor that I think is really important to call out that affects homes over $1 million is the stock market. And we saw a significant amount of uncertainty at the beginning of this year, partly because of the tariffs, and then these are tariff-induced stock sell-offs, where the stock market fell nearly 20% starting in February. And this home was listed right around here, which means the market had started to fall, but really as the home was just sitting on the market, just getting there, the stock market really declined a lot. Probably 18% of the losses happened after this home came on market. And I think that unfortunately limited the number of buyers that felt confident to purchase this kind of a home, because a lot of them are looking at their portfolios and are essentially saying whether they feel good or not based on that. And if they're seeing big drops in their portfolio values, they're probably going to say, hey, now's not really a great time to buy a house. Let's see what the market does. Now, the market has come back since then. The hard part now is you got 77 days, you got however many days on market since March, and that's putting you at a disadvantage, because the home is essentially viewed as it's stale. Somebody's going to look at it and offer a lot less because they feel like it's been on the market for a long time, and it's sort of a circumstance of timing in this case, as well as just coming at the market probably at a higher price than it should have. If we look at the market history, this is for River Sound neighborhood specifically. Now, we don't, this is 29 to 24. There have been no sales in River Sound so far in 2025, so we don't have any information there. But you can see that all of the price gains happened between 21 and 22. And since 22, prices have been largely flat. In fact, from 23 to 24, prices have actually gone backwards 3%, which again tells you that we should be listing, taking that into account when listing this home, which probably says that the right price to enter the market at might have been 149. Nevertheless, there's not a lot of price growth happening right now because we really did a lot of that during this pandemic sort of boom that we had. Rates have gone up since then, and until we see something change with regards to rates or just time for the market to kind of take a breather and start to advance again, we're in a market that, again, sellers have to be a little bit more aggressive to get their home sold to gather that buyer attention. If we look at the active and sold properties, you can see just how much this market sold out in River Sound, right? There were significant number of listings back in 2018, 2019. A lot of people having homes for sale those years to essentially nobody having homes for sale back in 24 and 22. And then really there's only a few, 1, 2, maybe 3 sales a year in this neighborhood. So it's not something that's got a lot of turnover, which suggests it may take a little bit longer to get a home sold, maybe a little bit harder to price a home because you don't have a lot of comps to go off of. And right now you're in a position where, there is a decent amount of competition in the neighborhood and nearby, not necessarily for this price point per se or this size of a home, but in general, there are options for buyers to pick from if they want to live in this area. If we look at days on market, we can see that it's gone up more than double now, from 35 to 77. And this is telling us that, again, the buyers are moving on homes that are potentially sitting for longer. It is taking more to get a home sold, and also could be referencing maybe how realistic the sellers are when they're entering the market. And so they're sitting for longer before they get things sold, especially in River Sound. And as you look at the price that sellers are getting compared to what they came onto the market at, on average, it's a 4% reduction from where they entered the market. And it's really important for us to realize that this is only for what sold, which is not that many houses. So there are other houses, right, that are sitting on the market that have not adjusted their price, may have to adjust it even more to actually sell, but we haven't seen many sales happen, so it's not flowing into this number. So, your seller may drop 4% from where they are currently, but given the fact that all of the other factors that we're talking about, they may have to do it even more to get the home sold based on the price that they came into the market at. All right, these are more likely realistic sellers that are coming to market based on what these numbers suggest. If we look at the showings this year, March, April, and May, we can see that in general, showings have slowed down in May. Now this is by price point, so some of it you can see is at the lower end. And I've highlighted here, you're currently in this red band, and we're seeing 4 showings per listing. So you can kind of factor that in based on how many showings you're getting. the reason why I would tell you that going to 1.4 doesn't seem to be a market mover, and why I don't necessarily recommend that price, is because we're not seeing a whole lot of showings in there. It doesn't seem like there are a lot of buyers interested in that. We're seeing 2 showings, 4 showings, 1 showings per listing in here. But look at what happens when you get into the 1.3, 1.39, right? It jumps up significantly. Now that has slowed down in May. Could be for a variety of factors, could be the inventory that's available, whatever. But it tells me that there's a whole lot more interest as soon as you get under 1.4, which is why I'm recommending that 1.39 price. If we look at the seasonal factors that are affecting this listing in general, I've got a blue line here, and we talk about this in coaching. This is the seasonal pattern for how homes are or how the market in Northeast Florida, so it's the 5 counties, how that changes over time each year, and what's the repeatable pattern that typically comes up that we see. And then the orange line is what's happening this year. So it is normal for us to see the number of listings in the market increase through the summer and then start to decrease as we head into the holiday seasons. But this year we're seeing a higher number of active listings. And again, that's largely because we're seeing buyers not stepping up and purchasing at the same rate that they normally do. But that is signaling more competition for sellers, which is why it's even more important that sellers list at the right price, as well as just know this: the new homes coming on the market are getting a lot of attention compared to the ones that have been sitting. And that is something that's impacting those existing sellers each and every month. If we look at new listings, you can see here, it's following the normal seasonal pattern, right? It's a little bit higher than this long-term average, but in general, since 2018, it's the normal amount of listings that we've been getting. But this just shows you every month we're adding a lot of new listings. And it's something where you can expect May, June, and July to, and really August, to add a decent amount of new listings as well. So competition isn't going to go away. It's only going to probably get fiercer, which is why sitting for longer before doing small price reductions is not an effective strategy of getting a listing sold, right? Now, again, if the seller's not super interested in selling and just wants to have it on the market to see if the right buyer happens to come along, then great. But if the seller really wants to sell this house, they need to factor this in. If we look at closings are following the seasonal pattern as well. Remember, though, these closings stem from contracts the month prior typically, right? So we are expecting to see closings increase in May and June, but it's already June. And so a contract now would result in a closing in July, and we can see there's a drop off, right? We've already really gotten to the point where if you're not under contract now, you're in the slowdown cycle of sales, because we're going to see fewer and fewer sales as we get through this. I know that feels weird because the summer's just now starting, but people go under contract. It typically takes them 30, 45 days to close. Obviously, you can close faster, but that's usually the timeline associated with that. So I would say that the odds of going under contract are going to start to diminish based on what our normal seasonal patterns are. And if we look at the sales price, this is another reason why sellers are feeling a little bit more pressure. That stock market decline really, I think, and the tariff uncertainty really put a damper on price growth so far this year. And we are under trend. Now, we may see prices rise a little bit through the summer. But again, remember, your seller's not under contract currently, which means that really he would miss this and is starting to factor into the downslide because it already is June, right? The stats for May come out the 10th. We're not there yet, so we're missing this. This is the most recent information we have. But this is just one of those things where we are underperforming on price, which is why prices are feeling a lot more pressure currently. It's not as much that overall values are falling in Jacksonville as much as it is that I think sellers are coming in high and having to reduce. And maybe what is selling happens to be a little bit more affordable in a lot of ways throughout Northeast Florida. Now, if we shift gears and look at the listing competition, we can see that in River Sound, there's only one other listing that would be direct competition if somebody's saying, I'd like a 3,000 square foot house kind of a deal. And this puts you where you might feel like you're priced appropriately, because looking at this, you're $200,000 less than the competition in this case, and you got a full bathroom compared to they've got 3.5 baths. So this is something where, you might say, okay, well, we are positioned pretty well. But I think it's important that we zoom out a bit and look at what a buyer might be considering. And I think that, again, right north of this home is the plantation. And I think that provides the most direct competition for anyone looking to buy this kind of a home. Now, some of these price points go up, $1 million more than where you're at currently. So maybe you might say that's not the same buyer, but they do have homes that are in direct competition, right? And so this is just a list of the actives, the pendings, and the closed properties in this sort of area, right? 263. So you can get an idea of what's selling, what's under contract, and what's active to see where you fit. And I've highlighted here where the subject property falls in line. And to help us sort of visualize this, because you can go through and read these details, I like to visualize this to see it. So here's the same listings, color-coded the same way, right? Blue is closed, orange is pending, and green is active. We can see here square feet on the left and list or sales price if it's sold on the bottom. Now, your home sits right here on the less expensive side, but one of the things that's interesting to me about this market is that a lot of the homes that have sold or are under contract are above this line. And this is what I alluded to in the executive summary, telling you it's not necessarily just a price thing, right? It always is a price thing relative to the location and the features and the layout and all of that. But the market is saying that buyers are okay buying things that cost a little bit more per square feet. Maybe they are just a little bit more of a prestigious home, say in the plantation, that carries with it some sort of status that this home doesn't offer because it's not in the plantation, right? Maybe the layout of this home is something that isn't conducive to what people want, right? Maybe there's features of this home that don't stack up to what the other homes offered, and people are willing to pay a premium to get those things. That's one of those things where I would say, go look at each one of these listings and see, hey, what's sold and how does it really compare to what we've got in terms of those things. That might be one of the only ways you can kind of get a feel for this. But just looking at this, we put a trend line on here. If we shift over and look at price per square feet on the bottom and days on market, the other thing that we see is that the subject property is right here, right on this trend line. Everything underneath that line is considered fresh, right? And you look at where all of these sold properties are. There's only one that happened to be well over here, and you can see it was pretty cheap, right? And it might be one of those things where you got to get your price to square foot down this, right? It's got to go on a line right here the longer it sits on the market. That's one thing to think about. Everything that's selling or going under contract typically has been on the market for less than 60 days, and most of these less than 30 days. And so that tells me that you either get it right out the gate and you get traction, or you're forced to really reduce your price to get something moving, right? This sold at, $365 a square foot, which tells me that this listing being at, $475, $485 a square foot is going to need to reduce it a decent amount. So we put all that together, and that is how I come up with my recommendation. I would love to hear any sort of feedback that you got. Hopefully this helps with understanding where this property is positioned. And I look forward to you guys finding success with this listing. Thanks.